So when you picture the agency, right, what comes to mind? Probably crystal clear water, maybe those whitewashed villas.
Santorini, Mykonos, that whole vibe.
Exactly, the ultimate holiday spot. But if you look at a map of the Cyclades, there's this one strip of land that, well, it doesn't fit the postcard.
It's called Makronisos.
Makronisos. It's dry, it's barren, and if you sailed past it today, you'd just think it was another uninhabited rock.
Which is exactly what it looks like. But if you rewind the clock to, say, the late 1940s, that rock was the site of one of the most intense social experiments in modern European history.
And I don't use the word experiment lightly. We are not talking about a standard prison here. This wasn't a place to just lock people up and throw away the key.
No, not at all.
This was a facility designed by the Greek state with a very specific, almost eerie purpose to psychologically dissolve a person's ideology and build a new citizen from the scraps.
It was a national re-education camp. That was the official title. And the scale of it is just staggering. We're diving into a system that processed tens of thousands of people.
Using a mix of architecture, propaganda, and, frankly, medieval brutality to force them to change their minds.
But before we get into the horror of how they did it, we have to set the stage. Because this didn't happen in a vacuum.
No, we're in the thick of the Broke Civil War. It's 1946. World War II is over. The Nazis are gone. But Greece is just absolutely tearing itself apart.
It's a polarized nightmare. On one side, you have the right-wing government, backed by the British and later the Americans.
And on the other, you have the KKE, the Communist Party of Greece, and their military wing, the Democratic Army, or DSE.
And the government has this massive problem.
A huge problem. They have thousands of citizens, soldiers in their own army, civilians, former resistance fighters who just fought the Nazis.
Who they suspect of being leftists.
Mm-hmm.
They view these people as a virus, a threat to the national body.
So the question becomes, what do you do with, potentially 50,000 viruses?
You can't execute them all. That's bad optics, even for a civil war. You can't just jail them because you need them to be useful citizens again. You need to cure them.
And that is where Makronisos enters the picture. The government decides to create this quarantine zone for ideology, a place where they can scrub the communism right out of your brain.
And the way they organized it wasn't chaotic at all.
No, it was terrifyingly bureaucratic.
That's the first thing that just jumps out at you from the records. The organization. They treated it like a military operation because, well, the army was running it. They divided the camp into these special battalions, the ETOs.
I was looking at the breakdown of these units, and it's like they were sorting people based on how infected they were perceived to be.
Exactly.
You had the 1st Battalion, the 8 ETO. These were guys already in the army conscripts, regular soldiers, but the brass suspected them of having anti-national sympathies.
And suspected is the key word there. You didn't need to be a card-carrying communist to end up there.
No. If you read a certain newspaper, or if your cousin was in the resistance, that was enough. You were sent to the 1st Battalion.
Then you had the BETO, the 2nd Battalion. This was more of a holding pen for the dangerous ones, a maze of civilians and soldiers seen as active threats.
But the one that really stands out is the 3rd Battalion, the GETO.
The unrepentant.
Yeah, these were the hardliners, the true believers, the people the system hadn't broken yet.
But what really chills me, looking at the source material, isn't just the men, is who else was on that rock.
Right, this part threw me. You assume a military camp is for military-aged men. But they had the SFAI, the Special School of Reform for Minors.
A school.
A prison for kids. We're talking about teenagers, young boys, being subjected to the same psychological warfare as hardened soldiers.
And eventually they even set up a separate camp for women. So you have this barren island hosting the entire spectrum of society, men, women, children, all there for one purpose.
To be reformed.
And let's talk about the physical reality of that reform, because camp might make you think of barracks or...
Yeah, mess halls, proper buildings.
But when the first prisoners arrived, there was nothing.
Literally nothing, just rocks and wind. The prisoners had to build their own prison.
They lived in these rows of white canvas tents that would freeze in the winter and, turn into ovens in the summer. Or they were hauling stone to build the administration buildings.
It's a classic psychological tactic, isn't it? You make the inmate participate in their own incarceration.
Absolutely. But the environment itself was the first weapon. Makronisos is dry. There is no natural water source on the island. Not a drop.
This is one of those logistical details that just becomes a nightmare in practice. All the water had to be shipped in by Navy tankers.
And if you control the water, you have absolute leverage.
It turns biology into a bargaining chip. The sources are so specific about this. Water wasn't a right, it was a reward.
If a battalion wasn't showing enough enthusiasm for their re-education, the tanker just wouldn't come, or the rations would be cut.
Can you imagine? You're working 12 hours a day hauling wrecks in the Mediterranean sun, and the only thing keeping you alive is the goodwill of the person trying to break you.
And that brings us to the core of the whole experiment. Because they weren't just starving people for the sake of it. There was a goal. They wanted something from you.
The signature.
The Declaration of Repentance. The Delosi.
This piece of paper was the holy grail of the entire Makronisos system. The whole operation revolved around getting you to sign it.
And it was basically a document where you denounced the Communist Party, you denounced the resistance movements like EAM and ELS, and you admitted you were wrong.
But it wasn't just a private confession. This is where the psychological genius, and I use that word darkly, really comes in.
Signing the paper was not enough. You had to make it public.
Right, you had to burn your bridges. The sources describe prisoners being forced to write these open letters to their hometown priests or to the local newspapers in their villages.
Imagine that. You sign this thing, and then your family, your friends, your old comrades, they all read a letter in the paper where you call them traitors and criminals.
It destroys your identity. It creates a situation where you can never go back.
If you sign, you're ostracized by your own people. You become a pariah to the left, which means your only option for survival is to cling to the right, to the state. It's forced assimilation through social suicide.
And while all this psychological pressure is happening, you're also being subjected to this bizarre moral re-education.
The camp administration was obsessed with proving these prisoners were returning to Greek Christian civilization.
Which manifested in the architecture. We touched on them building their own prison, but they were also forced to build churches.
That image is so surreal. You have these starving, thirsty men, many of them atheists or communists, hauling rocks up a hill to build a Byzantine-style church.
It was performative patriotism. The guards didn't care if the prisoners actually believed in God.
No, they cared that the prisoners were acting like they did. It's about behavior modification. If you force the body to kneel, the idea is that the mind will eventually follow.
It creates this cognitive dissonance. You're building the symbol of the regime you hate day after day. Eventually, your brain just gets tired of fighting the contradiction.
But humans are stubborn. And ideology is a powerful thing.
And there were thousands of people who looked at the water deprivation, the churches, the declaration, and just said, no, I'm not signing.
The unrepentant. And this is where the experiment shifts from psychological pressure to pure, unadulterated violence.
When the mind games didn't work, the administration took the gloves off.
The descriptions of the torture methods on Makronisos they are difficult to read.
It wasn't just beatings, it was creative sadism.
It was systematic. The sources detail these methods that were designed to induce maximum panic and terror.
The one that really haunts me is the bag. We have accounts of guards taking a prisoner, tying them up inside a weighted sack.
And then throwing them into the sea. But they wouldn't just throw the man in. They'd put a live cat in the bag with him.
It's just horrific. You're drowning, you're in the dark, and you have this terrified animal clawing at you in a confined space. It's designed to break the human spirit through sheer panic.
And then there was the standing torture. It sounds almost mild compared to the bag, but the medical reality is brutal.
They would force prisoners to stand in a designated spot without moving for days, not hours.
Days. The body just shuts down, circulation fails, your legs swell up to double their size, and eventually the heart gives out or you suffer permanent nerve damage.
It's a low-effort way for the guards to inflict maximum damage. You don't even have to touch the prisoner. Gravity does the work for you.
And on top of the direct torture, you have systemic neglect. Typhus was rampant.
Yeah.
Medical facilities were a joke.
Well, the doctors were often part of the system. In a re-education camp, the doctor isn't there to heal you.
He's there to patch you up just enough so you can go back to being re-educated.
It creates this atmosphere of just total despair. The sources mention the suicide rate was incredibly high.
Of course, people throwing themselves onto the barbed wire or off the cliffs just to escape.
It makes sense. If your choices are sign and lose your soul, or don't sign and lose your mind, death starts to look like the only freedom left.
But you can only compress a population this much before it explodes.
And in 1948, the pressure cooker finally burst.
This is the climax of the violence on the island, the massacre of 1948.
It happened late February, early March, specifically at the ATO camp. The conditions had hit a breaking point, the beatings were constant, and the prisoners, remember, these are soldiers, finally gathered to protest.
They demanded better conditions. And the response from the administration wasn't
It
negotiation.
was annihilation.
The guards and the armed military units just opened fire on the crowd, on unarmed men.
And this event is where the history gets really murky because of the cover-up.
This is really the deep dive insight we need to focus on. If you look at the official government papers from 1948, they spin a very specific story.
A story of a violent communist revolt that the guards fired in self-defense. And the official death toll, they said 17 people died, maybe 21.
A tragic skirmish.
Exactly. But then you talk to the survivors, you look at the oral histories collected decades later, and the number isn't 17.
It's closer to 350.
That is a massive discrepancy. We're talking about hundreds of human beings. How do you hide 300 bodies?
You use the sea, the same sea that isolated them. Survivor accounts describe this gruesome scene that night. Military boats, specifically landing craft, being loaded up in the dark,
Loaded with bodies.
weighted down with stones and wire, and taken out to deep water. They just dumped them. It's the ultimate erasure.
If there are no graves, there's no massacre.
It allowed the state to maintain that fiction of 17 deaths for decades because the evidence was at the bottom of the agent.
It really highlights the impunity. They knew no one was coming to check. They could do whatever they wanted.
And for the survivors, witnessing that, knowing your friends are being dumped overboard like garbage, that is a trauma that never, ever leaves you.
So when we try to calculate the cost of this place, it's hard. We know between 40 and 50,000 people went through the Makronisos system.
A small city's worth of people.
And in terms of deaths, we estimate about 350 from that massacre, and probably another 150 or so from the daily torture, the typhus, the starvation. So maybe 500 dead.
Which, in the grand scheme of a war that killed tens of thousands, might sound low to some. But that misses the point entirely. The human cost of Makronisos wasn't primarily a body count.
No, it was the living dead.
Exactly. Most people survived Makronisos. They signed the paper or they waited it out and they went home. But they didn't go home whole.
Physically, thousands were disabled. We're talking about chronic heart conditions from the stress, crippled limbs from the beatings.
Respiratory issues from the tuberculosis and typhus. But the psychological scar is the real legacy.
Imagine going back to your village after signing that declaration. You're alive, but you've publicly betrayed everything you believed in. You've betrayed your friends who died refusing to sign. That guilt.
That's a heavy backpack to carry for the rest of your life. And the state knew that. That was the design. They sent these broken people back into society to serve as living warnings.
This is what happens when you resist.
And for decades, the story of what actually happened was suppressed. It was a taboo subject in Greece. It was a battleground of memory.
On one side, you had the official state narrative. Makronisos was a reform school, a patriotic academy.
And on the other, you had the whispers of the survivors. It took years, decades really, for the truth to come out. Now we have the Makronisos Digital Museum, we have the archives, but it was a fight to get that history recognized.
It makes you realize how fragile history is. If those survivors hadn't kept talking, if those historians hadn't dug for the truth, the official version might be the only one we have.
The sea can hide bodies, but it can't hide the truth forever.
So let's zoom out. We've looked at the battalions, the thirst, the declarations, the massacre. When you look at the whole picture of Makronisos, what is the takeaway?
I think it's a lesson on the terrifying efficiency of ideological enforcement. So this wasn't chaos. It was a modern, bureaucratic system designed to break the human spirit. And it happened in Europe in the mid-20th century.
It's a reminder of how far a government will go when it feels threatened. When the state decides that a certain group of people are internal enemies, the legal protections, the human rights, they just evaporate.
And Makronisos shows us that re-education is often just a euphemism for destruction. They couldn't really change the way people thought. They could only break them until they pretended to change.
Which brings to the final thought I want to leave you with. We spent a lot of time talking about that Declaration of Repentance. The state tortured, starved, and killed to get those signatures. They collected thousands of them.
Stacks and stacks of paper.
But if you have to hold a gun to someone's head or, throw them in a bag with a cat to get them to sign a paper saying they love the government, what is that signature actually worth?
Does it represent a changed mind or just a survival instinct?
Exactly. And the darkest question of all is, did the government even care about the difference? Or was the submission itself the act of breaking the entire point, something to mull over? Thanks for taking this deep dive into the hidden history of Makronisos with us.
We'll see you on the next one.